St. Louis and Kansas City, two cities located on either side of the great state of Missouri. Located just 3 hours away, these two cities have a lot in common with one another. Both urban areas surrounded by acres of farmland, both cities very connected to art and music, both having a connection to jazz and blues, and both cities claiming that they have the best barbecue in the country. I grew up on the St. Louis side, so I have a little bias, but even I have to give that last one to Kansas City, and I think Ted Lasso agrees with me.
Barbecue sauce.
If there's one thing these two cities don't have in common with one another, it's their sports teams. St. Louis has been able to escape the trap of being a relatively small market in the middle of the country and keep a competitive baseball team on the field almost as consistently as the Yankees or the Dodgers. The Royals, on the other hand, have had a few flash-in-the-pan moments, which they've seized, only to be relegated to the basement of the league for most of their existence. The Chiefs are on the precipice of becoming the NFL's next great dynasty, and when it's all said and done, Patrick Mahomes could be considered the greatest quarterback of all time. For St. Louis, the less said about football, the better. St. Louis has had the Blues, a team that's almost always competitive, but beyond that, there was always only one other sports team in Missouri, Sporting Kansas City, who in fact haven't even played a home game in Missouri since 2007. Still, in the early days of MLS, there weren't many teams to root for, and seeing as the next closest team was the Chicago Fire, most St. Louis sports fans thought it easier to stomach rooting for a Kansas City team over a Chicago team. I'm speaking from personal experience here, there really isn't a lot of bad blood between these two cities. The NFL teams being in separate conferences only played each other every 4 years, making any sort of rivalry hard to form. The Cardinals and Royals do play every year, but they mostly stay out of each other's way these days and are rarely both good at the same time. There was that brief scuffle back in 1985, but seeing as the Cardinals still have 11 World Series titles to the Royals too, it seems a bit like punching down to keep harping on that series. So when it comes to soccer, it was easy for most people on the St. Louis side of the state to root for Sporting. There wasn't really any reason to dislike Kansas City sports. It was especially easy to root for their soccer team, a sport that was still trying to gain any popularity amongst most Americans. If you happen to know about MLS and care about it, there was really no need to root against them. I remember rooting for Sporting in the final against Salt Lake. I went to a handful of Sporting games throughout the early 2010s. There was never reason not to. Then, all of a sudden, there was. MLS's rapid expansion meant a bid by St. Louis, and I have to rewind a little bit now. St. Louis has always been a hotbed for soccer culture in America. Amateur teams from the St. Louis area participated and won the US Open Cup multiple times from the 20s through the 50s. You can check out my video about the US Open Cup in St. Louis. Trust me, it's worth a watch. I'm sure you've heard a few of these last points before, but over half the World Cup team that beat England at the 1950 World Cup were from St. Louis and played on a club in St. Louis. Some notable St. Louis soccer alumni are current Fulham center back Tim Ream, current Norwich forward Josh Sargent, former MLS MVP Taylor Twellman, and so many more. Once MLS decided to take the leap and expand more aggressively, St. Louis was a natural destination for the league. Although there were setbacks and delays, St. Louis City SC, I know, a little wordy for my taste, began play in February 2023, MLS's 28th season. They are the new kids this year, joining the league as the 29th team. Kansas City, they've been here a minute. They started play as the Kansas City Wizards back in 1996, one of MLS's debut clubs. They've gone through a facelift and a name change to modernize their brand and are one of the more successful clubs in MLS history. No, they don't have 4 or 5 MLS Cups to their name like DC United or LA Galaxy, but they have 2 of their own, plus a supporter shield and a whopping 4 US Open Cups. That ties Chicago and Seattle for most of any MLS team, and they're the only team to win the final every time they've appeared. So, in their 28 years of existence, they've won 7 trophies. That's pretty damn good, and besides the obvious dominance of DC United and the Galaxy, situates them right at the top of the league. Kansas City has become a hub for soccer in America in their own right as well. They're home to the U.S. national team's massive training facility, are one of the biggest supporters of their NASL team, the Kansas City Current, and are one of the hosting cities for the upcoming World Cup in 2026. Once St. Louis entered the league, of course a natural rivalry was going to form. It's the only sport besides baseball where both cities have a team. And let's be honest, the most notable thing that's happened between the Cardinals and the Royals in the past 30 years is the Rally Cat. That rivalry is friendly at best. So, with two mild-mannered cities, both experiencing success in their sports teams in recent years, both mostly out of each other's way, how did this rivalry become this nasty this quickly? These two teams have both been playing in MLS for just a few months now, and the fans absolutely hate each other. It's a little corny from both sides, but they won't even refer to each other by their actual team names. Even when you consider the proximity, it's a rivalry that seemingly came out of nowhere, and it wants to be as bitter as Galaxy versus LAFC, or Sounders versus Timbers. But between St. Louis and Kansas City, it already feels personal. And that's because of one little slip-up by the Sporting front office. On March 20th, 2023, a few weeks into the MLS season and St. Louis's record-breaking win streak, one of the many St. Louis City fan podcasts was sent a cease and desist letter from the Sporting Kansas City front office. The reason? The name of the podcast was the Soccer Capital Podcast. Still not making sense? Well, Sporting apparently had a trademark in place for the term Soccer Capital. The podcast was forced to change their name to River City Ramble, and to be honest, they made out pretty well, getting exposure from media outlets across the league and even a jersey collaboration with Olive and York. But for fans of St. Louis, as well as the rest of the league, this was seen as petty, cowardly, and weirdly personal. For a sports organization to go after a fan-run podcast, that's pretty low. And of course, as St. Louis has become accustomed to things like the Rams leaving town and the infamous hand pass in the 2019 St. Louis Blues Cup run, St. Louis fans do not let things go. Sporting Kansas City had gone after one of their own. Now it was time to retaliate. Now is the time to be petty. Billboards were put up on I-65, the highway connecting the two cities, each with a different tidbit of St. Louis soccer history. Fans took to social media and absolutely ripped Sporting KC's admin apart. By week 14, when it was time for the two clubs to play for the first time, St. Louis City made Soccer Capital merch to sell at the game. And how did that first game go between the two clubs? At that point in the season, St. Louis had staked their claim as a contender for the top of the Western Conference. Kansas City, on the other hand, their season had not gotten out to the start they wanted, and this was looking like a year to forget. Going into the match, though, Sporting was in good form, winning 2-1 in Seattle, a place St. Louis previously lost 3-0, winning 3-0 against Minnesota, a team St. Louis took their first ever loss against, and even drawing LAFC 1-1 in LA, a team that would demolish St. Louis 3-0 a few weeks later. Those are three amazing results, and Sporting was looking to claw back into the playoff picture. St. Louis, on the other hand, they were coming off a 2-1 home loss to Portland and back-to-back losses against the Chicago Fire, one of those games knocking them out of the US Open Cup. Their pride was hurt. The headlines had been written. This team was just lucky. It was time for it to all come crashing down. They don't belong here, not yet. This match was a fork-in-the-road moment for City, and they took all the haters and gave them something to chew on. The first ever derby between these two clubs saw St. Louis come out on top 4-0. They did this without the help of their number 9 DP striker, João Klaus. Midfielder Indiana Vasilov made his mark in this game by taking a penalty in the box that led to an Edward Leuven converted pen and bagging 2 goals himself. Add in a Berkey shutout, and we have a completely one-sided affair in round 1 of this cross-state rivalry. The two teams didn't cross paths again for the next few months, and both teams were knocked out early in both the US Open Cup and Leagues Cup. There wasn't much to banter about. Then, another shot was fired, again by Sporting Kansas City. It was their turn to host this rivalry game, and they made sure to pull out all the stops. In the week leading up, the social media team released a hype video that only referred to St. Louis as the team out east, and even called them a flash in the pan. I know I'm going to come off as a complete homer here, but in the video, it said that Kansas City has a more rich history than St. Louis. Okay, if we're talking MLS, I can give you that obviously. We're talking about the newest expansion franchise versus an MLS original. But another line in the video literally says, "You can keep your soccer history, we're the team of the future." Not only does that contradict your previous statement where you claimed you have a more rich history, but to call yourselves the team of the future and have one of the oldest average-aged teams in the league and a head coach that's been there since before your rebrand, that's pretty silly. Not only that, but to say all this about a team that's in first place in the conference, yet you yourself not even hold a playoff spot, it's pretty blasphemous. Kansas City set themselves up pretty horribly going into the team's second matchup. But wouldn't you know it, Sporting Kansas City takes the second game 2-1 to even up this rivalry. I know up top I mentioned I'm biased since I'm a St. Louis fan, but it doesn't take a genius to see how poorly reffed this game was. Sam Adeniran's second goal of the night was taken off the board due to an offside call that was really close. There was a second goal from Kansas City that could have been looked at for offsides as well, but this one wasn't nearly as close as the Adeniran goal. There were fouls on both ends that could have stopped the play right before each team scored a goal, but nothing was called. And then to top it off, the handball. I'm going to run the risk some more of sounding like a scorned St. Louis fan, but I think the handball call in MLS is a legitimate problem. Here's a clip of the ball touching a Kansas City player's hand while he was in the box. The hand is away from the body in an unnatural position and undoubtedly makes his body bigger. This was not called a handball. This was not even reviewed for a handball. Here are a few other calls that were looked at for review that were called against St. Louis in the game surrounding this one. If the ball touches any part of the hand, it should be a handball. I don't mind that these other two were called. The fact that this wasn't even looked at is beyond my comprehension. Although it was a close game with some questionable calls, Kansas City was the team that amped up the pressure after they went down 1-0 early. They fought back. Alan Pulido scored 2 goals to give his team the lead, and they earned the win at home. They beat St. Louis at their own game, winning every 50-50 ball, attacking with more intensity, and St. Louis was left just hoping for a call that never came. The one positive takeaway here for St. Louis is that their fans absolutely showed out. A good portion of the stadium was decked out in red, and if you took a picture at a certain angle, it looked like a St. Louis home game. Moral victories aside, Kansas City earned the 3 points. The rivalry currently sits at 1 win apiece. The petty St. Louis side of me says that Kansas City barely got away with the win and they benefited from the ref's call. Whereas in the first game, St. Louis destroyed Sporting. That doesn't matter anymore. There is 1 game left between these two teams, and if Kansas City wins, they'll own the record between these two clubs. Counting Chicago, St. Louis has played in 4 rivalry games this season and only won 1 of those, losing 2 games in a single week to the Fire. They want this win badly. For Kansas City, every point matters as they are playing for their playoff lives. They can't afford a loss at this time in the season, and losing here might just eliminate them from contention for the 2nd straight season. St. Louis is going to make the playoffs. A loss here at home would be terrible momentum heading into those playoffs. Have I hyped this game up enough for all of you? I know this rivalry is brand new, but it's already burning red hot. You should be tuning in. This is gearing up to be the game of the week. Will St. Louis clinch a playoff spot? Will Sporting Kansas City keep their playoff hopes alive? We'll all find out soon enough. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, check out these other St. Louis soccer videos I have on the channel. As always, please like and subscribe. Thank you again, and I'll see you in the next one.